Good morning, everybody. I'm going to be doing a series of these. I already did one. I don't know if you even watched it. Not many people did, but it's called "The Perspective Is Everything." And it's a Greek perspective of my memories and how that affects it. This is more like a personal diary to a certain extent, and this is going to continue. It's almost going to be like my like a biography for me, autobiography. So I'm doing this on video. I have to really decide I'm going to keep this up, try to do it in regular intervals, and maybe a lot of people can see themselves and, in daily life. Um, I started the previous video, or I finished the previous video, based on, my life when we had just gotten to America. Um, and especially with everything that's going on in America, I'm just going to say that our years in America, perspective is everything. For my dad and my mom, and for us as children, my brothers, my cousins, I think they'll agree. And most Greek Americans that I know, my neighbors, people that were the Greek community, they loved America. They have every reason to love it. Um, you're saying, well, why is that? Because a lot of people are just always bitching everything sucks and it's terrible, and we're living in a Nazi state where everything is just so bad. And I'm tempted to be cynical. I'm sorry, I see both sides, and I'm just trying to show what the perspective of some people are, and why perspective is reality, and we have to accept that reality. Um, like I said, my parents got there; they had nothing, man. You know, they were poor as hell. Under today's standards. I mentioned, I don't want to go through the whole thing again. How we had gotten there. There were, up to seven Greek kids. Could you imagine how American neighbors must have looked at us when we were playing outside the Babanikas home? Seven boys between the ages of 7 to 14. We must have been making noise and playing outside. And the American neighbors saying, those fucking little Greek kids making noise. And from their perspective, they were right. you know, so, but that's how we were. We're boys, we're playing around. I only have good memories. But like I said, my parents would work like dogs. Unimaginable for people today. Our generation is really, really spoiled. A 40-hour work week and stuff like that. Paid vacation. My parents didn't know anything like that. My parents were looking for overtime, baby. I'm serious. That's what my parents were looking for. They were like, "Can we make money? We can make money. Let's make more money. Let's go to work." Um, and this is just not a Greek American thing. I mean, that is a Greek American thing. I'm sorry, but growing up alone today, what would be called growing up alone. Um, it was just normal. I don't know if Bob, my neighbors, Mike, all we grew up alone. In reality, our parents just threw us out the house. Basically it was like, get the fuck out of here, do whatever you want. We would spend hours and hours and hours outside, playing all the time. We didn't have internet. We didn't have PlayStation. I'm a readaholic even as a little kid. But you can finish a newspaper in an hour and a half. What are you going to read? The obituaries? So even as a 9, 10-year-old, what are you going to do? We were riding bikes. We made ramps. We did shit. We were active. We were out there. That was our reality. I don't see that shit anymore. So, things have definitely changed. The term, every day it's the same old shit. But you know what? I'm 60 years old. Everything has changed. Um, and that's how it is. But again, this is like a personal odyssey and how we've traveled and everything. So, I don't want to hear people always bitching about America. So, because, it's the immigrant dream for some people, but those are the people going in there and, working overtime. That's what they're doing. But it's hard for me. That perspective is always going to, I try to take it with me. And let me show you another thing on perspective. When my grandma, yeah, I have two yayas. Yeah, they both came to America at a certain point. My father's mother, she came first, my yaya. And now let me go into her story. For Americans, you're going to flip out. There's an obscure Balkan group of people called the Vlachs. My grandmother went from, she used to tell a story. She came in like 1972. I was like 9 years old, and she was my grandma. She lived with us, so she came to America. Yeah, we did it legally, I mean, in case you're wondering, I'm not for illegal immigration. My parents did it legally. Okay, they actually applied for paperwork and all that kind of shit. They had to put down a guarantee to make sure that my grandmother was able to visit America, that she would be, not on welfare. And no, we didn't apply for welfare for my grandma. My parents found it unethical to apply for welfare. Can you believe that? Can you believe that? My father never went for an unemployment check. They got laid off once, he just got another job. He thought it was unethical to collect money from the government. My brother can back this up. That was his perspective on reality. Think about that. These are the immigrants, I think they have a more American-based mentality than the third world mentality of the first world nation that we're living in. I think a lot of immigrant people understand what I'm talking about. That American dream was, for those people. The rest of us can't really live that American dream like our parents did. But regarding my grandmother, she used to go as a village from a little girl in Greece. Now you got to imagine her perspective. She was probably born, I think it was like 1902. Okay, 1902, 1903. And she used to tell me these stories. We lived in Wildman Street in Danbury, and we would sit there. There was no TV. We only had about 3 channels back then, guys, right? And there were no children's programs. You had to wait for Saturday morning and Sunday morning for children's programs and cartoons. So my grandmother would tell us stories. What great times. And she would tell us stories how when she was a little kid, they walked for like over a week. She was a daughter of a shepherd of this group of Vlachs. And they went from Katerini to Samarina, the highest village in the Balkans, way up in the mountains, in the second highest peak of Mount in Greece, and Mount Smolengas. The highest peak being the mountain of the gods, Mount Olympus. And that's where she came down to. They went from the second highest peak to the first highest peak. And she would tell me how they had mules and donkeys and thousands of sheep. And they would go, and I was fascinated with this. I love those stories. It's affected me till now because that was her reality. And I wanted that reality. I was a little kid in Danbury, and just learning how to ride bikes and stuff like that. You can imagine what a little kid. That changed my perspective. I always wanted that somehow. I think that's affected me even not till now, to travel, to hike, see how, if you saw the first video, I said, they say that your formative years are those years that you can't even remember. But those early years, in fact, are your complete formative years of how you react, what kind of phobias you have, what kind of needs you have and urges. But I still remember those stories. I'm fascinated. I was able to do a part of that tour with my son. I love that. And her memory in life is completely different than we can imagine. My grandfather went to America, she was left alone in Greece. He would come back every couple of years, get her pregnant. It's the truth. And then he would go back to America, and then he'd come back, get her pregnant again, make sure she wasn't screwing around. I had 7 kids, 5 boys, 2 daughters. Both daughters died when they were like little babies and stuff like that. They were shepherds. But she was a strong woman. And my kids like this story, so I'm going to tell it to you too. For me at that age, again, 8, 9, dad is God. And I lived in a Greek home at that age. My cousins and most of my generation will agree, you did not raise your voice to your dad or your parents. I don't know why, you really did get one across the back of the head. Yes, you did. Patch, you're laughing. I'm laughing. I'm sorry. I hope you're laughing. If you're shocked, because I know a lot of younger people are going to be shocked. Oh, child abuse. No, we didn't consider it child abuse. Let me just get off the point here. Child abuse is you do that, only that. This guy would hug me and kiss me like 3 minutes later. But to get to the point, oh God, man, I lost my train of thought um, because of this. Um, but my grandmother, yeah, that's it. When dad is like, the biggest guy in the world. You don't question. I thought, it's like God, right? When you're like a 6-year-old or a 7-year-old, a 5-year-old, God, it was like, and my mom used to threaten us with that. Oh, wait till your father comes home. I'm serious. Um, but anyway, um, I realized that, all of a sudden that my dad was not the authority in the house. It was my grandmother. My grandmother would yell at my dad. If he started yelling at us, this is true. My brother would guarantee this too. If my dad would get angry, and he got angry easy. I'll go into another story with my dad. But she would turn around, "Anachafis," in Greek, "Fia korpe," in Vlach, it's a different, it's a Latin language. Basically, you're a useless guy. How can you yell at this at the kids and stuff? And we used to go hide under our so we realized that the president had a higher court. We could go to the higher court. This guy might be, but there's a higher court. And that changes your perspective in life, kind of. I don't know for maybe other American families, but the Greek American families, they know grandma. Don't fuck with grandma. I'll give you an example, guys. Go to a cross section in Greece to those zebras when you're trying to cross the street. No car gives a shit until an old grandma goes to cross. Everybody's hitting the brakes. Nobody will raise their voice to grandma. It's just the way society works there. It's just kind of funny how it changed my perspective. My other grandma. Here's another story. Hopefully, my cousins, Dimitri or you guys are watching. But my other grandma. Now her story. Think about her. She was probably born around the same time. Turn of the century. And we found out later now it's somewhere in a Georgian village. They were actually refugees from 100 years before because of the Turkish genocide against Armenians and Greeks, and thousands of these people, hundreds of thousands of these people went to Georgia, and they founded villages there. She spoke a very it's a Greek dialect, Bondiaka, but there's a lot of Turkish words in there, Russian words in there, and my grandmother was always elegantly dressed in black. I'm serious. She always had like a scarf around her head and a silver cross. And she had at least 15 different colors of black. Why do they, both my grandmothers, I only know them in black. Now, when I travel, perspective again, the only place I see this again is in Muslim countries. Um, a lot of people don't like, they're Islamophobes. But most older women that I see in scarves, I relate to my grandmothers. Okay? I hope you can understand that. I don't take that shit seriously now when people they understand why I'm cynical. When people are going, oh, I've heard this in Germany, it was like a 14-year-old girl, 13-year-old girl, and she was wearing a scarf, and they were, oh, it's a political statement. I'm like, come on, guys, a political statement that you can't see the human in that person. They can't. That's their reality. That's their perspective. They have no contact. This is a modern thing. They're not curious. They see something on the internet now we're just automatically scared. People weren't like that back then. Not as much. They were shocked at her. They were, she was exotic. Like I said, my cousin Dmitry, she ended up having like really bad case of Alzheimer's and dementia back then. And, she would literally leave the house and just try to find our house and start walking down the street, got lost, would go back to neighbors, my grandmother. But again, she was a product. This woman lived through war, deprivation, um, the stories that she had, she didn't talk as much about her childhood because it was a rougher childhood, obviously, at least we never got to hear more about that. Um, her husband was like 25 years older than her. My grandfather. My grandfather was 63 when my mother was born. I'm 62, I'll be 63 this summer. And this is before Viagra, okay? This is just olive oil and garlic. A 63-year-old man impregnated my grandmother. My grandmother, we must say this, 24 years, she was 39. She was obviously she was, wasn't much of a problem for her. And then again, who needs Viagra at 63 when you got a 39-year-old wife? Come on, it's a joke. Please, guys, come on. It's a joke. It's just perspective. Everything is perspective. I think enough about that for that point of view. I don't know. I'm going to try to keep these in short segments. So I just wanted to get that across of what it's like being an immigrant. But, afterwards, I must say, again, I did this in the first part. We didn't have anything missing. Today we think we have something missing, but we didn't know that it was missing because we never had it. You understand what I'm saying? Perspective. My mother used to tell me she was rich, if you saw the first video, because they had a cow. That was her perspective. Most people didn't have milk. Cow meant you had milk and cheese. You could trade that milk, sell it, get eggs, and so on and so on. So from her perspective, she was rich because everybody around her was at the same level, and some were even lower, so she felt rich. For example, my father, who was, because of the war and an orphan, he couldn't, he was stealing chickens. So their American perspective, I'll go up to this, I remember this now, even all the way up to like maybe 1974. All my uncles, I'm sorry, my brother, everyone in the family, all we did was work. Okay. Let me give you an example of 1974, why I'm saying 1974. Maybe, I'm sorry, 1975. I did make a mistake. 1975. In 1974, the Turks had taken over Cyprus. The military dictatorship had gone down in Greece. My uncle had passed away in exile in a prison on a Greek island, because he was a communist. That's what they said. If you want to know the story, this is the official story too. This is not the bullshit story. The guy, during Second World War, ended up hiding because he was a cripple, kind of, he had a thing. But anyway, he was hiding. We're talking about my dad was 12, so he was 16. He was a 16-year-old. He was helped hide an English officer with the help of Greek communists, because they were the rebels back then. They actually fought the Nazis. So this was during the Rebel War. This was not like but these rebels happened to be communists. Most were, by the way. Not all of them, but most were. And as a 16-year-old, he did help them. This is, well documented and well known. He was never caught by the Germans, though, by the way, which is, a great thing. But because he had helped in the EAM, his paperwork now was listed in the EAM. The EAM being that organization full of communists that were fighting the Nazis. The Civil War comes, where communists are actually declaring autonomy, blah, blah, blah. And because he was on that list as a 16-year-old, he's a communist now. He was first arrested in 1947, 45, 46. So one brother was in jail as a communist, and the other one was fighting for the army, the Civil War. But anyway, he had passed away. And I remember my parents going to a demonstration in 1975 for Cyprus because the Turks had invaded Cyprus. Now, again, perspective. Um, it was important for the Greek community to support, Hellenism in Greece and go down there. I remember that. Why? Is because I wanted to go, but I couldn't go because I had to work. And I realized this later in life. I was 12 years old. I worked from 7 at night till 7 in the morning at a place called the Olympic Flame. Um, Crazy, isn't it? That you would send your kid from 7 at night till 7 in the morning. But I was proud. I was happy. I thought I was contributing. My brother was working too. He was already working. You know, none of my American friends had that. I'm just being honest, even for my cousins, because I had to grow up quicker. Keep pace, you know what I'm trying to say? Like, if your oldest cousin at 17, Leo was my hero, he was doing karate and shit like that. And Dimitri and my brother, so as a younger kid, you're always trying to keep pace quicker. And so, but beyond that, what I'm saying that is perspective is now I see, I saw this in Germany where Palestinians were demonstrating. And people were actually, this was the extent they were like, because their perspective is different. They were like, wow, they should protest in their own country about their own goddamn shit. Perspective. And then I see myself and my story and my life, and I try not to be hypocritical, because I see that my parents did that. But why? They feel threatened. I don't know why. And again, my perspective, like, what, are you threatened by the Greek community demonstrating for Cyprus? But yes, they were threatened even back then. People get threatened. They get threatened by what they don't know. That's what I think. That unknown. There's a fear for the unknown. There's no curiosity. There's no adventure anymore. There's just fear. Um, yeah. But that's it for part two. Growing up in America. I'll start a little later with my teenage years and what it's like being an American kid. Okay. Thank you for watching. For anybody that has watched. Bye.